organized labor is crushing Canada. And sadly, citizens can't expect help from the Conservative Party of Canada on this. We had the recent federal bill C-58. It whizzed through Parliament with unanimous consent, and it will be law soon. That bill makes it illegal for private companies in federally regulated sectors to hire replacement workers if there's a strike. One can expect such a terrible piece of legislation to be supported by the NDP and the Liberals. They're socialists. We expect that. One would have hoped, though, the CPC would have allowed a free vote on the bill. Sadly, we're disappointed. Instead, the vote was whipped, and every member of Parliament was forced to support it, whether they like it or not. Or we're supposed to believe that 100% of the Conservative MPs really think that handcuffing private companies like this is a good idea. The only thing that terrifies federal politicians more than Indigenous issues is organized labor. Not a single federal party is willing to stand up for Canadians against this union tail wagging the national dog, and we're all going to pay dearly for that. Canadian productivity and GDP per capita when measured against other developed countries has been in free fall for years. Inefficient unionized workplaces and a continually bloating civil service has contributed heavily towards this. Despite the growth of the federal civil service numbers by 40% in the last decade, services have become more terrible than ever. Not only that, but the government workers have become more belligerent and entitled than ever too. I mean, last year they held Canadians hostage with a strike, and this year they're threatening what they call a summer of discontent. You want to know why? Because they might have to show up for work more than 2 days a week. Oh, those poor dears. Public service unions have been much too powerful for far too long. Governments capitulate to union demands with little hesitation, and as if that wasn't bad enough, C-58 will now empower those unions to hold private companies in fields like trucking, media, telecommunications hostage as well. Even pipeline construction is going to be subject to a ban on replacement workers if the pipeline crosses a provincial border. I mean, look how expensive the Trans Mountain pipeline expansion was, and think of how bad it's going to be now that unions are truly going to run the show. Organized labor doesn't just harm us through the skyrocketing compensation demands and the chronic labor actions and the protection of lazy workers. It actively fights against the pursuit of efficiency and changes. Canada Post is a perfect example. The days of house-to-house mail delivery should have been gone long ago. We don't need it anymore, and it costs a fortune. They're just overpaid flyer delivery boys. The Crown Corporation began moving towards centralized mailbox systems until the Postal Union managed to convince Trudeau to end this important evolution in delivery. The Liberals had an election approaching, and they were afraid of the Postal Union, so they bought their support with a promise to maintain obsolete home delivery. Now Canada Post is burdening taxpayers as a chronic money loser. Last year, they lost $740 million just in 1 year, and it's not going to get any better. Now, while the union control of the postal system is an expensive annoyance, it becomes even more dangerous as unions fight reforms and efficiency in fields such as healthcare. The Canadian healthcare system is collapsing in every province, under every government of every political stripe. The rigid monopoly system has created a monster that costs more every year, while the waiting lists for procedures get longer and longer. The system itself needs reform, but unions act to fight every effort to change the status quo, and they fight it tooth and nail. Even the outsourcing of something as simple as laundry services suddenly becomes a hill for unions to die upon, and governments back away in fear from pursuing even those minor reforms. Meanwhile, people are literally dying while waiting for treatment. Unions are there for the unions, not the patients, despite what they claim. Teachers' unions, they regularly demonstrate where union priorities really are as well, despite their claims to being there for the students. They like to cloak themselves as professional associations and purport to be acting in the interest of the students. Somehow the interest of the students always translates into more compensation for teachers, though, with fewer days worked. The teachers' unions dig deeply into social activism as well and bring their woke ideals into the classroom while fighting against any form of standardized testing to assess whether they're actually effectively teaching children. They say every child learns differently, yet they vigorously oppose diversity in learning through opposing charter or alternative schools. The social activism within unions has really come to a head during the Israel-Hamas conflict. QP Ontario leader Fred Hahn's vile demonstrations of anti-Semitism, oh, he hates Jews, have horrified Canadians since the conflict began, as he coaxes his union members to actively take part in anti-Israel protests. No matter where one lands on that issue, it should be asked, why is one of the largest unions in Canada taking any role in that conflict on any side? What has it got to do with Canadian worker rights? Nobody will ask those questions, however. Even Poilievre's Conservatives have tightly gagged themselves when it comes to dealing with unions. Organized labor is spreading like an infection, while callow politicians purposely look the other way. Canada should be looking at right-to-work legislation rather than banning replacement workers in private industries. Instead, we see unanimous consent on legislation that's handcuffing industries. Sorry, kids, the economy's going down and things are going to get much worse before they get better.